From the San Francisco Public Press, you're listening to Civic. Federal cutbacks in medical research are reverberating across universities, hospitals, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Driving the disruption are sweeping reductions in federal science funding under the Trump administration, cuts that reach from Alzheimer's studies to a decades-long project tracking the health of 1 million veterans.
The private sector doesn't do this kind of research.
The fallout isn't just institutional, it's deeply personal.
I ended up getting surgery for a pacemaker. I feel like I'm walking around with a little reminder in my chest of how important federal funding and research is.
In this episode, we'll hear from researchers sounding the alarm, advocates fighting to protect science, and patients whose lives were saved by past breakthroughs. I'm Sylvie Sturm, and this is Civic. As a journalist, I cover a city that's home to both the University of California, San Francisco and one of the largest veterans medical centers in the country. So when research dollars are cut in Washington, the impact lands here, in our hospitals, our universities, and in the lives of local veterans. And full disclosure, I mentor students involved in UCSF's student newspaper. That means I see firsthand how uncertainty is weighing on the next generation. In conversations with scientists, students, and veterans, I hear again and again how research shapes people's health and their futures. Science already moves slowly, but researchers say that as teams are breaking apart and patients are waiting longer for breakthroughs, momentum that once carried discovery forward is slipping away. After World War II, the United States made a conscious decision to lead with science. President Harry Truman emphasized this national commitment during a speech at the 1948 centennial meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science.
Science means a method of thought. That method is characterized by open-mindedness, honesty, perseverance, and above all, by an unflinching passion for knowledge and for truth. It's the climate of a totalitarian country in which the scientists are expected to change their theories to match changes in the police state's propaganda line. Such an atmosphere is un-American.
Out of that era came a trio that still anchors the nation's research system. Number one, the National Institutes of Health became the backbone of biomedical research. Number two, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, born from the fight against malaria, evolved into our public health radar. And number three, the National Science Foundation was established in 1950 to fund the basic science that seeds tomorrow's breakthroughs. Together, they represent America's answer to scientific research, a structure as essential as highways or power grids. Nearly every major new drug that reached patients over the last decade can trace its roots back to publicly funded research. But the Trump administration's 2026 budget blueprint proposed historic cuts to America's science backbone, slashing the National Institutes of Health by 40%, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention by 44%, and the National Science Foundation by nearly 60%. The administration's budget office framed them as cost-cutting and streamlining. Critics warned that they would gut the nation's research infrastructure and cripple America's global scientific leadership. It's easy to get lost in the numbers when we talk about research funding, but for some, the value of that investment is literally beating in their chest. That's the case for Erin Morrow, a PhD student in cognitive neuroscience at UCLA.
I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I went to undergrad there. Around my senior year at Emory University, where I went, I started to develop these symptoms. I was feeling shortness of breath, chest pain. After going to a few doctors, they ended up doing an EKG, and I discovered that I had an electrical disorder of my heart. And that was really kind of shocking news at 20, 21 years old to hear. While grappling with all of this, I very quickly ended up getting surgery for a pacemaker.
As she looked deeper into the device that keeps her heart beating, she realized it has a surprising history.
It was kind of invented by accident. I think there was a setting that a scientist was playing around with somewhere around the 1950s or 60s. It ended up putting out an electrical impulse rather than measuring it. And that was a big light bulb moment, literally. From there, they decided that, this has real medical potential to have a regularly paced heart that has a normal rhythm, and people could live for decades after that implant. Now, there were many strides to get to the point where we are at today that has led it to become such a versatile device that I'm able to live with and live a fairly normal life with today. That pacemaker, as well as the research that supported it, our understanding of how the electrical activity of the heart works, neither of those things would have been possible without decades of investment in US research. So I feel like I'm a living reminder, like I'm walking around with a little reminder in my chest of like how important federal funding and research is.
Morrow is part of the next generation of researchers who depend on NIH support to pursue their work. Her studies focus on memory and post-traumatic stress disorder, a topic that isn't abstract for her. She knows the loneliness of being sick, and she wants her work to ease that burden for others. But she's entering the field of science at one of its most uncertain moments.
There's been a breakdown in communication between people working in science and people that are not working in science, and other folks, like people in power, can take advantage of that miscommunication when we're not, speaking clearly and having conversations about the kinds of research that we're doing and why we're doing it. People can come in and say, they're doing this work that's meaningless.
Young scientists from across the campuses of the University of California system joined a nationwide campaign aimed at breaking down those communication barriers.
Scientists haven't always done a great job of reaching out to communities where they come from. We have work to do, but we're starting to do it now by opening up these conversations. This really passionate, amazing group of graduate students and other early career researchers who are watching all of these cuts and threats to science funding happening. They want to approach it in a humble, community-oriented way. We wanted young scientists across the country to really tap back into the communities that supported them in their journeys to become scientists. Talk to them like you would your grandmother or your friend or your neighbor. Talk about, I come from this community. I, to an extent, understand the circumstances that are impacting this community. And these are the challenges that are facing federal science as a whole right now. And they impact us. They impact our community, our shared community. We decided to start this campaign called the McClintock Letters Campaign after Barbara McClintock, who was the first female solo recipient of a Nobel Prize in the US, which is writing op-eds to hometown newspapers.
Just as today's young researchers aim to expand conversations about scientific research and invite various perspectives, the Trump administration is working to narrow the lens from all angles. Earlier this year, Trump signed an executive order aimed at ending what he called, quote, radical and wasteful diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the federal government. That means new rules for grants to colleges and research institutions. In order to receive funding, they have to certify they do not run any DEI programs that now violate federal law. If they can't make that guarantee, their grants can be delayed, rewritten, or even terminated. In fact, more than 100 UCSF awards were terminated for ideological reasons in the months following President Trump's executive order. Dr. Monica Gandhi is a professor of medicine at UCSF and a nationally recognized HIV researcher. She said that the ripple effects of Trump's new order were immediately felt at UCSF.
Really everything started for us the day of the inauguration, actually, because on the day of the inauguration, there were many executive orders put out that, many weren't biologically based, like there isn't any such thing as gender. UCSF has, of course, a range of disciplines, but HIV is a very big discipline at UCSF. We were the epicenter of the epidemic, so we have $80 million that comes in from the NIH in HIV just alone. So we were already starting to panic with any, order that said there's no such thing as gender. It's crazy on a public health agency funded by the government to say the government rejects these because they had the word gender. So we started to panic, and then all these other kind of cascade of events happened, like grants started being terminated. And by not getting their grants, staff have been fired, some labs have been on pause. Everyone was scrambling to put in new grants with like out the words. You're suddenly changing your whole research platform. I had to change recently. I was just turned it in today. I changed the word inclusion of a site to incorporation of a site just in case they caught it. Like that's just a waste of time. And so crazy things like that. And then any diversity related grants, they all got terminated. The impact has been to really chill science, kind of freeze it up, have early stage investigators question whether they should go in science. What it's ended up doing, very unfortunately, has led early stage investigators to question whether they should go into research. It may, stall a generation of scientists.
That was Monica Gandhi at UCSF. That's one of the campuses that joined a lawsuit led by California Attorney General Rob Bonta that challenged Trump's new orders. In June, U.S. District Court Judge William Young ruled that cutting $780 million in NIH grants tied to DEI was illegal and discriminatory, and he ordered them reinstated. But in August, the Supreme Court overturned that order, effectively allowing the government to cut funding even when the reason is unlawful. In late September, the University of California won another legal victory when a federal judge ordered the NIH to restore terminated grants to UC researchers, saying the agencies didn't follow the law in how those grants can be pulled. When we asked the NIH about this, they referred requests for comment to the Department of Health and Human Services, which did not respond. As we learned from talking to Erin Morrow at UCLA, some young researchers are not ready or willing to give up their dreams. Among those at UC San Francisco is PhD student Sneha Rao. Rao is a member of the UCSF Science Policy Group, which is dedicated to teaching young scientists a valuable skill that sometimes gets lost when immersed in academia: how to write and speak in plain language.
A really positive aspect of the past maybe few years is just the idea that community engagement is not one-sided. Like it shouldn't be one-sided. It's not I'm coming to you to tell you about something and you're going to listen to me. It's much more of a two-way dialogue. Some of us have, family members who are from all different, values and all different faiths and from different communities. So it's a really good skill to have, to just be able to talk about your work to other people and communicate its importance and why you're interested in it. Yeah, and I know I've had personal experiences like navigating difficult, controversial topics with some of my research, and family members really just figuring out how to word things in a way that you're not trying to pit yourself against the other person, but really engage in a two-way dialogue. And I think that's something that typically academic institutions don't always train their grad students for. It's definitely a practical skill to have, and I think more so in an age when politics and polarization seems to be creating more and more barriers as opposed to bringing them down.
Publicly funded science can break private monopolies by bringing discoveries into the public domain instead of making them costly and out of reach for ordinary people. Deep federal cuts do the opposite, starving public research and driving innovation into the hands of private industry. According to Suzanne Gordon, nowhere is that more evident than at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Gordon is a journalist and policy analyst with the Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute.
They're impacting research in sending veterans to the private sector because the private sector isn't going to offer them research opportunities and opportunities to, enroll in research studies.
The Veterans Administration is more than a healthcare system. It's a national engine of research. Since the 1920s, the VA has been at the forefront of discovery, producing breakthroughs in limb replacement, PTSD treatment, and cancer care. VA scientists invented the cardiac pacemaker, pioneered the first successful liver transplant, and helped develop the CT scan. But now hundreds of VA studies have been canceled or frozen. And Gordon said that cutting contracts, laying off researchers, and funneling patients into private hospitals that don't run large-scale studies is unraveling the VA's research mission and threatening the medical breakthroughs that benefit all Americans.
it's a national system. It's all coordinated. So the research, the teaching, it's a tapestry with these very tightly interwoven threads. So you send your patient out who has prostate cancer to a private sector oncologist. They're not going to enroll them in a VA research study that they don't even know exists. And then, the research studies have to be conducted longitudinally on a large enough population of patients to matter. You can't just do research on like one person. So if you're depleting the system of patients, you're impacting the research.
One project in particular is at risk, the Million Veterans Program, a genetic biobank with DNA from over 1 million service members. Scientists use it to study everything from cancer risk to post-traumatic stress. But without renewed federal support, the database could go dark. A memo from VA medical leaders warned that more than 10,000 veterans could lose access to life-saving experimental treatments. And the Congressional Budget Office estimates that a 10% cut to early-stage research means 30 fewer drugs coming to market over the next 3 decades. That risk isn't abstract, it echoes the personal history of people like Mel Mann. Mann was a 37-year-old Army major when he was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, or CML, in 1995.
The prognosis is 3 years to live. The only possible hope for a better outcome is a bone marrow transplant. There were very few people overall in the registry. So the best possible chance for anybody was 25%. And for someone who was Black, it was about 1%. So those were my odds. Of course, when I heard this news, I was like time just stood still and my perception of things changed. And I heard just ticking on the wall. It was like real loud, like boom, 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 boom. And looked at the wall, and it was the big clock ticking away. I kind of thought about, well, if I got 3 years to live, then how old will my daughter be in 3 years? And then I was trying to remember what I remembered at 8, and I couldn't remember a lot. Then I thought about, how was I going to break this to my mother?
Faced with impossible odds, Mann turned to clinical trials. For years, he tested new treatments with no success. But researchers kept going until they finally hit upon the answer, a class of drugs that turned CML from a death sentence into a manageable condition.
In 1998, the clinical trial started just in time, and it was just a game-changing drug. What was a death sentence became, just a chronic illness. You can still do whatever you need to do. My daughter, she grew up. She went to Harvard College, and then she went on to medical school, and she became a board-certified psychiatrist. I was married at that time for 10 years, and now it's over 40 years. Without research, I would not be here. Without the research of these previous people, and even that research back in the 50s was funded by the federal government. So it's very important for me that this continues uninterrupted.
And of course, veterans continue to benefit from research to this day. Jose Vasquez is an Army veteran who serves as Executive Director of Common Defense, a grassroots organization of veterans advocating for their communities. During Vasquez's Army service in the 1990s, he was stationed at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, a base later found to be contaminated with a range of toxins. And this year, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a disease with well-documented links to toxic exposure.
Thankfully, the prognosis looks good. They caught it early. It was stage 1B, but the reality is that pancreatic cancers tend to be pretty deadly and aggressive. And so I think the doctors are taking an equally aggressive approach. Chemotherapy, I do not recommend anybody for that. It definitely gets a 1-star review on Yelp from me. But the doctors have used the word cure, so that's really encouraging. But no guarantees. As you can imagine, this was a pretty life-changing diagnosis. I'm only 50 years old. I turned 51 in July. I've got 2 sons. I'd like to see them grow up and graduate college and get married and all of those things if that's what they choose for their life path.
Research at the VA has been one way to shine light on toxic exposures and connect them to the cancers, respiratory problems, and mental health conditions many veterans now face. But those studies are precisely what's threatened by the Trump administration's cuts.
What the Trump administration currently, and specifically Doug Collins, Secretary of VA, is trying to push forward is essentially kill the system from the inside and continue to make the case, because they've already been making the case, that VA care should be privatized, right? So at the end of the day, this has to do with profits and a mindset that somehow the government is inefficient or ineffective, but the VA is the largest single healthcare provider in the country. You've got medical records that you can compare across age, race, generation, period of service, geographies. Like, there's so much important data that the VA provides that at least gives physicians, researchers, and other folks that are sort of tracking this information a sort of wealth of knowledge. It's a real loss to the nation and to the world, cutting this research, many of which was like midstream. We're sort of cutting short what we've already invested in for how to deal with various diseases.
The San Francisco VA is one of the nation's leading centers for veterans health research, and a lot of that work is made possible by its nonprofit partner, the Northern California Institute for Research and Education, or NCIR. NCIR manages the grants, hires the staff, and handles the logistics, so VA doctors and their UCSF collaborators can focus on science. Its CEO, Rebecca Rosales, said the organization is feeling squeezed.
No doubt that this is a very stressful time. The number of new awards that NCIR has received in fiscal year 26 is about 35% down from where at the same time period last year. We're also seeing the incremental updates and budgets are being delayed. Renewals haven't come in. So existing projects are seeing delays. But for the most part, people are pretty resilient and committed to supporting research and trying to find ways that meet with the new administration's outlook to align both things. There are some, I'll say, keywords that have been identified as, sensitive. The funds are contingent upon adherence to these guidelines. For example, the inclusion of women, gender have come into play. And so far, we have been limited in the way that those have affected us. We are very careful to go through the terms and conditions with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak, to make sure that we are aware of the changes that may be in effect. So, it'd be, anything but transparent to say that this isn't a stressful time.
And anything giving you hope right now?
First of all, seeing our veterans on a daily basis coming in for their routine care, that gives me hope, right? Seeing people in the cafeteria, wearing their hats as, I served, those things give me hope because I recognize the value in the work that's being done, both the clinical and research work that's being done here on campus. It's not data, it's a real person that I saw eating lunch in the cafeteria and the possibility of making an impact on them long term.
The fight over federal research funding is now in Congress, and it seems Congress does not want to implement the worst of the cuts. That's indicated by the versions of the appropriations bills that have been floated in both the House and the Senate. In a Senate hearing this spring, Democratic Senator Patty Murray from Washington pressed Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about the human cost.
One of my constituents, her name's Natalie Phelps. She's a mom of 2. She has been fighting aggressive stage 4 colorectal cancer for nearly 5 years now. Her best hope now is a clinical trial she's participating in at the NIH Clinical Center. But because of the thoughtless mass firing of thousands of critical employees across NIH and HHS that you carried out, Natalie's doctors at that clinical center have told her they have no choice but to delay her treatment by an additional 4 weeks. Now, an extra 4 weeks may not sound like a long time, but I will tell you, for stage 4 cancer patients like Natalie, This could mean the difference between life and death.
In the House, Democratic Representative Kevin Mullen said NIH cuts will devastate his district just south of San Francisco, which is home to the birthplace of the biotech industry.
Over $200 million in NIH funding has been unlawfully rescinded. Slashing these investments will shutter labs, lay off thousands of researchers, and bring groundbreaking research to a halt right at the moment when we are poised to make once-in-a-generation advances against cancer, Alzheimer's, and other diseases.
And Democratic Representative Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts, who sits on the House Select Committee on the Economy, highlighted the damage that NIH cuts will cause to jobs and economic growth.
The NIH has about $35 billion budget. It returns probably $2.5 to $3 on every dollar spent. It's one of the best economic engines this country has. The president is proposing halving it to $17 billion, a complete own goal. And I also just got the Congressional Budget Office to release a report that basically showed even more clearly what a good value NIH funding is. It showed that it actually reduces deficits, for example, over the long run. You cut the NIH, it's not even saving money for the federal government.
The cuts have also drawn resistance from some Republicans. Senator Katie Britt of Alabama joined a bipartisan group urging the White House to release already approved NIH funds, warning that delays could threaten thousands of jobs and derail critical projects. And Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who chairs the Senate's Health Committee, said it bluntly. If you want to control long-term health care costs, you've got to invest in basic research. Democrats don't have the numbers of votes needed to block Republican cuts to science funding outright, but they've been using every tool they have. Their strategy is to raise the political stakes high enough that Republicans will compromise during negotiations over the final spending bill. Lawmakers had until September 30th to settle on a spending bill or pass a continuing resolution to keep the government running temporarily. Otherwise, it would shut down completely, and that would freeze much of the federal research system in its tracks. What happened was the worst-case scenario. The government shut down following a breakdown in negotiations. So, research proposal reviews by the National Science Foundation cease, VA contracts stall, and the NIH won't issue new grants. Labs will burn through what money they have with no new funding coming in, and America's research infrastructure faces its steepest decline in generations. But there may be some hope for California researchers. State Senator Scott Wiener is calling for the creation of a state equivalent of the NIH that would fill the void left by the Trump administration's slashes. SB 829 would establish the California Institute for Scientific Research within the state's Government Operations Agency. The institute would award grants and make loans to universities and private corporations for scientific research and development. State lawmakers need to support the bill, and then it will go to the voters to approve or reject in a 2026 ballot measure. As lawsuits wind their way through the courts and lawmakers and voters debate whether to fund research, the question remains, will America's scientific engine be allowed to stall, or will it continue driving the discoveries that save lives and define the nation's leaderships in health and medicine? I'm Sylvie Sturm. You've been listening to Civic. Civic comes to you from KSFP LP 102.5 FM in San Francisco, a project of the San Francisco Public Press, a nonprofit investigative newsroom. Find the companion article for this episode and all our reporting at sfpublicpress.org. Is there a topic you'd like to hear more about? Drop us a line at radio@sfpublicpress.org. Our team includes Executive Director Lila LaHood, KSFP Program Director Mel Baker, and Director of Development and Partnerships Lisa Rudman. Our theme music is by John Dillon. Additional music was supplied by the Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to our underwriting sponsor, University of San Francisco MFA in Writing Program. Civic airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on our radio station, KSFP LP 102.5 FM in San Francisco. Subscribe to our podcast by looking for Civic from the San Francisco Public Press wherever you get your podcasts. Support our work by going to sfpublicpress.org/donate. Come to one of our panel discussions about things that matter to San Francisco. Learn about those events and everything else public press related by signing up for our newsletter at sfpublicpress.org/newsletter. Thanks for listening.